Hello, I'm at the top of a very high observation tower in a remote part of Estonia, and what better place to talk about this week's particular study, number 5 in our series on Hebrews, Jesus the giver of rest. And in this very quiet and tranquil place, it's very easy to think about rest. But in our busy world of today, comings and goings, so many people, so much happening, sometimes it's hard to think about having time for rest, for a place of peace and quiet. That's what we often ask for, isn't it? All I need is a bit of peace and quiet. This week's lesson goes way beyond that. Jesus, the giver of rest, you remember he said, "Come to me and I will give you rest." Rest for your spiritual souls, your innermost beings. I will calm all of your worries, all of your concerns, and I will give you rest. And we're given the material for this time in Hebrews, and we're looking, of course, at this particular chapter 4. And let me read some of it from the Free Bible Version. After explaining what happened to the Israelites, Paul goes on to say, "Therefore, let's take care to make sure that even though God has given us his promise of entering his rest, none of you miss out." And he's using a parallel between us today, people in his time, and the Israelites of the past. For we've heard the good news just like they did. They also had good news, the Israelites, even as they crossed the desert. But it didn't help them because they didn't accept and trust in what they heard. However, those of us who trust in God have entered into that rest God mentioned when he said, "In my frustration I vow they shall not enter my rest." God got frustrated with his people, using human terms, feelings that we have to be very careful not to ascribe to God exactly, because he doesn't get frustrated, I'm sure, in the same way that we do, but that's what it says. This is so even though God's plans were already complete when he created the world. In other words, God knew what was going to happen. Regarding the seventh day, there's a place in Scripture that says God rested on the seventh day from all his work, referring back, of course, to Genesis. And as the previous passage said, they shall not enter my rest. So Paul is saying, I want to pick up this image, this concept of entering God's rest. Then verse 6. God's rest is still there for some who enter, even though those who previously heard the good news failed to enter because of disobedience. So God again sets a day today, saying a long time later through David, as he did before, if you hear what God is saying to you today, don't have a hard-hearted attitude. For if Joshua had been able to give them rest, God wouldn't have spoken later about another day. He's extended this metaphor. So a Sabbath rest remains for God's people. And he's not just talking about the weekly seventh day Sabbath. He's talking about an eternal Sabbath. For whoever entered God's rest also rests from what he's doing, just as God did. This whole concept of rest is a wonderful picture, metaphor, an allusion to what God can give to us. In all the busy, fractured nature of our lives, God can give us peace here and now. And he promises a wonderful peace there in the future, when we will be home together with him, at peace with him, with all the created beings of the universe, and that one beat of harmony pulses through God's universe yet again. I look forward to that day. So, as Paul is writing here to the people of his day, make sure you don't miss out on it. In the same way as those Israelites taking 40 years to cross the desert, which was completely unnecessary, but because of their distrust, because they failed to believe in what God was promising, they didn't make it. None of them made it, of that generation, except for those very few like Caleb and Joshua who were faithful. So let's remember that and make sure that we don't miss out on what God has promised, and let's enter into his rest here and now and look forward to that wonderful time of being home together with our God forever.